This is the idea of local authorities putting what are called buffer zones around abortion clinics. So people are allowed to protest, but a certain distance for the purpose of debate, 250 yards. You cannot go as close as that.
Well, I'm sounding like a cracked record here, but I'm going to repeat myself again. Do we love each person, even those we disagree with? Jesus said, love God, love your neighbour, love your enemy.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of About Abortion. Dave Brennan here, and I'm joined virtually by Tim. Tim, thanks so much for calling in today.
Good to be here, Dave. Good afternoon. Hello, everyone.
And for those who are familiar with our work, we've been doing a series of podcasts really exposing the reality of abortion, analysing what's been going on in our nation, and in particular, looking at the part that the church has to play in that, and what the church has been doing and hasn't been doing over the last 50 to 60 years. Tim, for those who are not familiar with you, just give us a little introduction of yourself. Who are you? Where do you come from? What do you do?
Sure, Dave. So my name's Tim Lewis. I've been working for Brephos since autumn, really, last year, just in a part-time capacity, but it's been great to be involved. I'm the Church Network and Theology Lead, and that's my grand title. Previously, really, I was involved in church leadership. So actually potentially relevant to this debate, I was in Anglican churches. I was a curate and a vicar, and then latterly in an independent church. But sort of a few years ago, 2020, really, I also began doing a PhD part-time in biblical studies, looking at developing a biblical theology of the unborn child. So it sort of nicely dovetails into what I do for Brephos. So that's what I'm up to these days.
Great, fantastic. And you're available to speak in churches, especially in the north of England?
Absolutely, yes. Do email me, tim.lewis@Brephos.org. I'd be more than happy to come and speak at your church on this issue.
Brilliant. And so, so your experience in the Church of England may well be helpful to us, because today we're asking the question, where does Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, stand on buffer zones? Okay, where does Welby stand on buffer zones? Now, just give us, Tim, would you give us just a real quick overview of what is a buffer zone? Why are we talking about this? We're going to be going into more detail later on, but there are going to be listeners out there, maybe they've never even heard of this. So what are these buffer zones?
Yeah, sure. Well, when we say buffer zones, we're talking about an area around abortion facilities. These particular buffer zones are 150 meters radius, so it's quite a significant area, really. Sort of, if you like, you think of the abortion clinic in the middle, it's a circle around it, 150 meters to the center, and it's an area really where the government have deemed it not appropriate, and as we're going to see, actually criminal, to be within that zone, that area, with the purpose of offering information, offering support, influencing the decision of people, women and girls primarily, but also staff at these places, entering these zones on their way to an appointment at the abortion clinic. So any kind of offer of help, of support, of maybe showing them a picture of the child at a certain stage of gestation, or just saying, look, we're praying for you, that is what these bills have sought to stop happening, in fact criminalise.
Thank you, Tim. And as we're going to no doubt be discussing later on, even silent prayer has been or is being, well, it has been in some places criminalized. So just to clarify for folks, there are a few areas where this has been the case through a sort of a PSPO or other kinds of sort of local council type bylaw, sort of, not national statute, but just local rulings. So first, I think it was Ealing and Twickenham, and then Bournemouth, Bristol, sorry, not Bristol, Birmingham. So we've had a few crop up, but now there's the push to make it national, and that's what's going through the Houses of Parliament just now. I think it's currently still with the Lords, and I think it's heading off for its third reading, which is, I think, more or less a formality. That's my understanding. So we're awaiting the third reading.
Yeah, so the PSPOs, again, there's lots of acronyms. That's the Public Space Protection Orders. So again, seeking to protect public space from nasty pro-lifers like me and you, Dave. But yes, so the PSPOs were quite explicit in banning prayer, and we saw the case of Isabel Vaughan-Spruce, for example, being arrested for silently praying in her head. And this is where it all gets quite 1984, because it's like, and actually, wherever you stand on abortion, it's like, well, this is crazy. This is, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience is all under attack here. But the PSPOs, which are very local, and as you say, quite only 5 or so in the country, what the government is proposing is to essentially replace or incorporate those local, sort of locally agreed things into this nationwide ban. So 370 odd abortion clinics would now come under this buffer zone legislation. They don't get the choice to opt in. They just assume that this is what they want. And it has been slightly tweaked. So one of the amendments that the Lords were debating and eventually approved is that so in a PSPO, you could in theory be imprisoned up to 2 years for breaking that law. That's been replaced by an unlimited fine, a level 5 fine, so still very serious. And the prayer has sort of, we'll see, it's the language of influence that is there in a big way, but it would certainly cover people praying in any kind of numbers. I think more than 2 people praying, and certainly any kind of signage, any kind of obvious pro-life identification would still be very much forbidden, really, by the proposed amendment to Clause 9, Rupert Hook's Clause 9 to the Public Order Bill.
So silent prayer could be back in. As in, we can smell that sweet air of freedom that we're able to pray silently in our heads once again, as long as we're on our own.
As I understand it, Dave, but like with all these things, the proof is in the pudding, and I think these things are going to need to be tested, and I think you can kind of see where it could go potentially, but
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll come back to those tests later on, because I actually saw Isabel on the weekend. On Saturday, I was speaking at a March for Life event with Isabel and some others, and so I was able to speak with her a bit about the latest on that. And when it comes to the question of testing the law, it's quite interesting. We'll come back to that sort of towards the end of this conversation. But so that's what buffer zones are, and that's what's going on in our nation. And the question we're looking at today is where does Justin Welby stand on that? Now, why are we talking about this? This is timely in at least 2 ways. So firstly, the buffer zone thing is very live. In fact, there's news that was breaking just today that we'll come back to later. A Catholic priest is also having to face court for praying and even for having a bumper sticker, which he already had. Wow. He's had this bumper sticker for months, maybe even years. But because this PSPO came into effect, whatever it was, a few months ago, he's facing charges, criminal charges, for a bumper sticker saying "Unborn Lives Matter." So that's all happening. So that's one reason we're talking about buffer zones just now. But why specifically where Welby stands? Well, of course, right now as we record, General Synod is what do we say? It's happening. It's very
in
much
session,
happening.
Perhaps. Yeah, I don't know. It's ongoing.
It's ongoing, and all sorts of issues coming up there. But what we've seen again and again is that on important issues and on controversial issues at the highest levels of the Church of England, the answer is so often we don't know, or we're not willing to say, or we'll try and say 2 contradictory things at once. And that would be bad if that was the answer to buffer zones. But the news we've got to break to you today is it's actually even worse than that. When it comes to buffer zones, the usual sort of equivocation would actually be preferable to what we've actually got from the current Archbishop of Canterbury. So we're not talking specifically today about what Welby thinks about abortion, important though that is. We'll perhaps say that for another time. But I am just going to play a short video which touches on that, because it kind of sets us up for the rest of this conversation as we look at what he has to say about buffer zones.
The Church of England has a very clear view on that, and had since the 80s.
I think the Church of England stance is very clear.
Well, I'm not clear about that at all.
I think it's relatively clear.
There is a variance of opinion and it's down to your individual conscience.
Not very clear at all.
Pretty clear.
Not clear at all.
For you, when is abortion acceptable and when is it not?
Well, I suppose this is where the unclarity comes in.
I think abortion is acceptable if the mother's mental health is at risk.
I quite like the line that was used in America some years ago, actually, of saying that abortion should be safe, legal and rare.
Each case would have to depend on its circumstances, and I would hate to be in those sort of circumstances.
Life is not black and white. It's a lesser of two evils.
I am against abortion for a simple fact. I'm an adopted child. And if abortion had been available in those days, I probably wouldn't be talking to you now.
I think it's an issue that has to be decided individually on its merits for every single woman.
Where do you think Archbishop Justin Welby stands on abortion?
I have absolutely no idea.
I don't know.
I've got absolutely no idea.
I'd have thought he'd have thought much the same as I did. I have no idea.
I have no idea because he wavers from view to view.
I'm not clear.
I think it's unclear.
It's very difficult to get Justin Welby to give precise answers to questions.
I don't know. I think you better ask him.
You'd need to speak to him.
You must ask him.
You'd have to ask him.
You could say they're doing the wrong thing, you could say they're doing the right thing, you could say it's their right, you can say that the baby has rights.
Okay, there you go, Tim. I don't know if you've seen that video before.
I have, yes. But it's quite shocking, isn't it? But I think it's a fair reflection of the level of muddle there is, the lack of clarity, and on a fairly pressing moral, ethical issue of our time, really, where one would hope that the church, the established church, Church of England, would be taking a clear stance as the kind of conscience of the nation, and would be being led by their archbishop, sort of shepherding the sheep, and you know, not necessarily just mirroring what the society thinks. I don't think people assume that the church is just going to reflect the world back to them, but it sometimes seems like that's what bishops feel that their mission vocation is in life, really. But very, very, very troubling to hear. And obviously Justin Welby wasn't exactly crystal on it himself, was he?
And that's one of the only, I mean, I'm thinking there are maybe 2 or 3 places I've been able to find him speaking about the issue at all, you know, and in all 3 cases, because he was asked, you know, he's put on the spot, what do you think about this or whatever, only 2 or 3 I can find anywhere. And that's that, and in all of those occasions, there is this kind of, well, you could say this, you could say that, and let's say a critical moral issue. I enjoy how that video finishes with this kind of crescendo of you got to ask him, and we are encouraging people, get in touch, write to him. People at General Synod right now, ask him, where do you stand? It's critical, because as we're going to see in the rest of this conversation now, he's an incredibly influential figure, not just within the Church of England, but globally and in the national media in our country. And what he says makes a real difference, as we're going to see. But as we say, we're not focusing specifically on what he thinks about abortion, though that's going to be obviously bearing influence in what we're talking about, but specifically buffer zones. Okay, now we talked a bit about what buffer zones are. Let me just go back to the early history of buffer zones in our country. Before there was this concerted push for national buffer zones. As I say, it started really in Ealing. Rupert Huck, the Labour MP there, major abortion supporter, championed this whole cause, and she's been trying to get it to go national really ever since. And a friend of mine and colleague, Christian Hacking, was arrested for praying out loud in the buffer zone within this prayer-free precinct a number of years ago. And whereas Isabel's arrest, which we'll talk about a little bit later, was very carefully planned and you know, timed and positioned, Christian's, by his own admission, was somewhat more spontaneous. But you know, I think justifiably so. He got to this spot where babies are being killed, and as he puts it, his bones just burned, and he did what you could only do, which is cry out to the Lord in prayer. And the idea that he should not be allowed to do that by the law of the land is crazy. So that's what he did. He prayed out loud. This is he's a disabled man, by the way. He's in a wheelchair, and there's video footage of him being carried off by the police, bundled into a van, and he faced charges. Now later on, they dropped the case, pretending that they fumbled the arrest, and it's because the specifics of the arrest weren't quite right or whatever. But I think really they lost heart, and they didn't fancy the idea of being pulled all the way up to the highest court level on appeals for arresting a disabled man for praying peacefully on his own. So anyway, that's what happened, and I wrote to Lambeth, to the Archbishop of Canterbury, to ask him to clarify his views on it, because I couldn't quite believe what I heard when Justin Welby was questioned on this on LBC radio. So I'm going to play that clip now of what he said when questioned about this, and then I'm going to just read to you really this correspondence I had between myself and his office to clarify, does he really mean what he's saying here?
It's time for one last quick question. Susan in Winchester, I'm sorry to have kept you waiting. If you can put it in a sentence, I'd be jolly grateful. Susan, good morning to you.
Good morning. Morning, Archbishop.
Good morning, Susan.
In a sentence, do you support buffer zones around abortion clinics?
And that really is a sentence. This is the idea of local authorities putting what are called buffer zones around abortion clinics. So people are allowed to protest, but a certain distance for the purpose of debate, 250 yards. You cannot go as close as that.
Well, I'm sounding like a cracked record here, but I'm going to repeat myself again. Do we love each person, even those we disagree with? Jesus said, love God, love your neighbour, love your enemy. Everyone gets caught up. Even I am caught up in one of those, not the first one. Yes, I do, because people going to abortion clinics, whatever you think of abortion, they're human beings. You could say they're doing the wrong thing. You could say they're doing the right thing. You could say it's their right. You can say that the baby has rights. The Church of England is very clear on this. I won't get into the detail of that because we're running out of time. But the Church of England has a very clear view on that and had since the 80s. But how do we love the people who are going there, treat them as human beings and value and respect them?
And that's the extent of Justin Welby's public pronouncements on the issue of buffer zones, as far as I have been able to find. Have you seen that one before, Tim?
That one I have seen. In fact, I think, reflecting on it, I don't think I had seen the first video. I'd seen the clip of it from LBC, but I don't think I'd seen everyone else's reaction. I mean, I have seen that, and I think, let me just unpack a few bits from it. I mean, first of all, it's the most. I mean, you really try and you want to be charitable, but what actually is he saying? This is somehow about. It's kind of broadened out into a bland statement about enemy love. As if the pro-lifers are really trying to lynch the woman or girl on the way to the abortion clinic, and there's nothing about the humanity of the unborn child that their presence is wanting to draw attention to wider society, but also to the mothers themselves. And we know of stories, and I believe you've brought these to the Archbishop's attention, of those whose lives have been saved because of pro-life presence in these places, and are here today because of that decision a mother made at the last moment. So there's nothing of that. It's this kind of bland, anodyne statements about loving our neighbour, as if that's in any way, shape or form controversial, as if someone rings into a radio show to listen to the Archbishop tell them that. Well, so on the one hand, and I think Justin Welby's got more about him actually than that. I think theologically we should expect more from him than that. So on the one hand, it's that just complete, lack of engagement, lack of critical thinking, and then he sort of alludes. The other thing I want to say is he sort of hints at the Church of England's sort of position on this, which is very clear. but he never actually goes on to extrapolate what it is. I mean, when the last general elections, there was these various abortion pledges that people were seeking MPs to sign, either pro-abortion or against abortion. The Church of England bishops were being pressed on this again. You really have to press them. There was a kind of statement, and it makes it clear, the Church of England in this statement, which was issued by one of the bishops of the Church of England, that you hear things like all abortions are tragedies. So that's something of that's an improvement. All abortions are tragedies. That's quite a big claim. And it talks about principled opposition. Well, that's helpful to know. There's a principled opposition, and I think this is what the bishops alluding to, the archbishops are alluding to, hinting at. But it's never really fully unpacked for us. And I think if you were to really push the Church of England position, it is really this principled opposition. But there's this sort of, I think one of the people in the first video talked about this lesser of two evils approach. I think there is very much a strand of thought for the Church of England that in the hard cases, which, we haven't got time to go into now, but in those hard cases that maybe it's deemed abortion is the lesser of two evils. Now, whatever one thinks of that position, which, as I say, is somewhat different, say, from the Roman Catholic position. Whatever one thinks of that position, it certainly isn't a kind of carte blanche for the 220,000 plus abortions that are happening every year in this country, over 800 every working day. It says, it's really, I think what they're saying is, well, we are prepared to permit those in the very difficult circumstances, the hard cases, that affect about 2% of abortions. But the 98%, the majority of abortions that are going on day after day, don't come near those, their own requirements. So there's nothing like that clear articulation of, their general position, which is the wrongness of abortion. And there's very little scriptural or theological engagement as to why that might be. There's no real acknowledgement that this has been the consensus of the worldwide church, Catholic, Protestant, Eastern Orthodox, for the past 19 centuries. It's only in the latter part of the middle of the 20th century that there was any kind of divergence on this, including from within the Church of England, of course. So there's no admission of any of that. It's just this, well, we want to love our neighbours. Well, we all want to love our neighbours.
Yeah, and that whole, claim, we've been very clear on this since the 80s, very clear, and yet we just heard from a whole bunch of General Synod members, and if they don't know, who does know? I mean, these are the sort of inner circle. They're right close to the beating heart of the House of Bishops and whatever else, confirming or debating doctrine, and they don't know the total variation of views between them. So it's one thing to say we've got a clear position, but if it's a state secret and literally no one can even define what it means, like what are those cases? They say it's in limited cases it may be preferable, for the abortion to go ahead. Well, what cases? No one can tell you. It's just not true that it's clear. But let me so I want to now just read out in full what I wrote to the Archbishop in really reaction to that video, and then what I heard back. Okay, so this is a while ago now. This is tail end of 2019. Dear Archbishop Justin Welby, I'm writing to express my deep concern over your recent response on LBC Radio to the question of buffer zones around abortion clinics. A man who uses a wheelchair was manhandled out of a public space for praying to the God that you worship. Christian Hacking is his name. He was arrested and charges were subsequently dropped. He had harassed no one. He had not even spoken to anyone. He had simply prayed out loud. In your LBC interview, you sided against Christian and others like him by supporting buffer zones. Are you aware of the hundreds of women and babies who have been saved from abortion by at-clinic presence? I've got a link there to behereforme.org. We'll put that in the description, behereforme.org. It's got testimonies from women, mothers, parents whose babies have been saved precisely because there was someone outside praying or giving information, offering support. That is exactly why their babies are alive today. Why are you opposed to getting them the help and information they will not get from the abortion clinic? Babies are alive today because of this help. Are you saying that these babies should have been killed instead? This is what buffer zones will ensure. You spoke about vulnerable people. What about the babies themselves? Are they not vulnerable and in need of help? You spoke of love. Do the babies not deserve love? Are they not our neighbours too? If Christians had stood and protested or even just prayed as Jews were taken off to be exterminated in Nazi Germany, would you have sided against those Christians too? You also mentioned that the Church of England has had a very clear stance on abortion since the 1980s. Could you please clarify what that is? Your Twitter feed is full of encouragement to pray, but in this case you are opposed to someone praying in a public space in this nation for something that is on God's heart. Are you in favour of freedom of speech and freedom of religion or not? I very much look forward to hearing responses to these questions. Yours sincerely, Dave Brennan. Okay, now that was towards the end of November. In early January, I heard back from the sort of press office. Okay, so let me read this again in full because I want to make sure people hear this because this. And then I'm going to show you the impact this has had directly on national policy and real lives. Okay, so dear Mr. Brennan, thank you for your recent letter addressed to the Archbishop of Canterbury. Much as he would like to, the Archbishop is unable to respond personally and in detail to all the hundreds of emails and letters that he receives, and so I have been asked to reply to you on his behalf. Okay, so this is someone who's authorised to speak on behalf of the Archbishop. Please accept my apologies for the delay in replying over the Christmas period. Thank you for taking the time to share your concerns in this matter. For the Church of England, every abortion is a tragedy. We recognise that in a limited number of cases, abortion may be morally preferable to any available alternative, but we remain very concerned by the number of abortions taking place and the assumption in some quarters that abortion is just another form of contraception. This is based on our view that the fetus is a human life with the potential to develop relationships, think, pray, choose, and love. We also recognise that there is no consensus about precisely when human life begins in the womb. Balancing the best interests of a mother against the interests of her unborn child is often a hugely difficult matter, reflecting the fallen nature of humanity. We believe that whilst abortion remains legal in the UK, our first priority should be the pastoral care of women who face such heart-rending choices, loving, valuing and respecting them. We should also continue to campaign resolutely against the normalisation of abortion as anything but an unsatisfactory response to tragic circumstances. Those facing challenging or unwanted pregnancies realise the gravity of the decision they face. All abortions are tragedies since they entail judging one individual's welfare against that of another, even if one is as yet unborn. Every possible support, especially by church members, needs to be given to those who are pregnant in difficult circumstances, and care, support and compassion must be shown to all, whether or not they continue with their pregnancy. It is important to recognise that one's right to freedom of speech and protest must be balanced against another's right not to feel intimidated or harassed, particularly at a point when they might be feeling especially vulnerable. Permitting protest, but at some distance from the entrance to clinics, represents an acceptable compromise in a democratic society. I've attached a file that can be found on the Church of England website that outlines the C of E position on abortion in a series of statements in recent years. This position is largely unchanged since the 1980s. Thank you again for taking the time to write on this important issue. Yours sincerely, Owen Morgan, correspondence manager to the Archbishop of Canterbury. And Owen Morgan was previously a pastor of a free church and is now undergoing ordination into the Church of England. Okay, so that's the response I got back. And then I wrote back to them. But Tim, do you want to jump in at all at this stage, or do you want to hear my response first?
Let's hear your response, Dave.
Okay, so I then wrote back to the Archbishop's office in early Feb. Dear Owen Morgan, many thanks for your reply, which I've read and reread and pondered carefully. Some further questions, if I may, for clarification. 1. I asked in my original email whether you think the many babies whose lives have been saved by at-clinic presence should have been killed instead, since you are against their parents receiving help and information outside clinics. I put those words in italics, help and information, because you seem to be following the mainstream media in misconstruing, quite by accident I'm sure, this at-clinic presence as protest. I'm not aware of any pro-life group protesting outside clinics. The only ones I know of in this country either share information about abortion or offer practical help or simply pray. Certainly those in Ealing simply pray and offer help. You replied saying that you are in support of buffer zones, which ban not only protest, but also the offering of information and help outside clinics, and even silent prayer. This means that your answer to my original question is, yes, you do think those babies should have been killed, rather than saved through help and information. You think that innocent babies should have been killed. For example, you think that it was inappropriate that Dee and Robert were given help that saved their son who is alive today. This is a link to the Be Here For Me website, a testimony from a couple called Dee and Robert. If Good Counsel were not there, Good Counsel Network's a sort of Catholic pro-life organisation. If Good Counsel were not there that day, then we would have gone inside and done the horrible thing. People in situations like we were in need of, need more support from other people, because some people say the baby doesn't exist. But here, as you can see, the baby is in my hands and is playing, and we are happy about it. The message, therefore, from the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Church of England to this dear couple and their precious son is, it is wrong that he is alive. He should have been killed rather than you be offered information or help outside an abortion clinic. I'm very happy to seek this family out and many others like them and deliver that message on your behalf. Please do stop and correct me if your position changes. 2, you say that in a limited number of cases, abortion may be morally preferable to any available alternative. I notice that the Church of England, to my knowledge, has never spelled out what exactly this limited number of cases is. You must have in mind which abortions are acceptable and which are not. Otherwise, this statement doesn't really mean anything. Or if it's intended to simply hand the whole thing over to a definition-free situation ethics where it's up to each individual to decide which abortions are okay and which are not, again, it renders it meaningless. So please could you spell out which abortions are acceptable and which are not? For example, is it okay to kill a baby in the womb because she's a girl? Or because there are already felt to be enough children in the family? Or because of poverty? Because of career? Because of relationship pressure? Which abortions specifically are morally acceptable in the eyes of the Archbishop and of the Church of England? 3, you say that you recognise there is no consensus about precisely when human life begins in the womb. But in fact, every medical textbook agrees that human life begins at fertilisation, just as dog life begins at fertilisation, and cat life begins at fertilisation. Consider for example, this paper by an associate professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. There is no debate around this. All medics and scientists agree that human life begins at fertilisation. It has to. It can't become human at a later point, meaning that it is some other species up to that point, nor can alive things appear out of things that are not alive. So it is human and it is alive. Human life. Moreover, the Bible is clear, for example, Psalm 51 verse 5, that from conception or fertilisation it is correct to speak of personhood and humanity. David was me from conception. Moreover, he was sinful from conception. How could he be sinful if there was no he? There is clearly human life from conception. And then finally, now even if we agree that there is not 100% consensus in the world on the above, is there consensus on anything? Surely the Church of England takes as its authority on an issue like this, firstly the Bible and secondarily science. Bible and science are absolutely clear that human life begins at fertilisation, conception. Do you agree with this view or disagree with it? 4, you said that you would continue to campaign resolutely against the normalisation of abortion. Could you kindly provide 2 or 3 examples of where you have campaigned resolutely against abortion in any way? I noticed that none of the 26 Lords Spiritual, the bishops in the House of Lords, even turned up to vote, let alone debate, against the Northern Ireland abortion bill, which seeks to absolutely normalise abortion in Northern Ireland by decriminalising it entirely. 5, you say that those facing challenging or unwanted pregnancies realise the gravity of the decision they face. Could you please help me to see how you've come to this conclusion? Dee and Robert's testimony above stands as one of countless that I've heard, where people had no indication of the gravity, partly because they had not been told the truth about abortion. Indeed, surely the only explanation for how 1 in 4 babies were aborted last year, more than 200,000, is that many people have absolutely no indication as to the gravity of abortion. Otherwise, they would only resort to it in the most desperate of cases. I'm also interested to hear how your contention fits with the lostness and blindness of human beings. Again, without the light of Christ, do people really understand the moral weightiness of taking their own child's life? It seems that many don't. The shocking thing is that even many Christians do not realise the gravity of the abortion decision. Why does the Church of England say that everyone knows already how serious abortion is? I should be most grateful if you could reply to each of these numbered points. Yours sincerely, David Brennan. And I never heard back again. So that was my correspondence with the Archbishop's office, and it seems to not only confirm but elaborate really that support of buffer zones. Anything jump out for you there, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great shame. I think you didn't get a full and thorough response, really, Dave. But I think just going on what was in the first letter from the Archbishop's office, I mean, there's a sort of cognitive dissonance going on, really, isn't there? As you say, on the one hand, there's this strenuous opposition, but try to pin them down, try to find even the slightest dissent from, the narrative that has been shaped by the abortion lobby, by, the mainstream media around these things, where, for example, in the BBC or the Guardian, you're not even allowed to say pro-life, you've got to be anti-abortion, and one looks in vain, really. I think there's also, to me, a sad lack of what we might call the prophetic dimension, the prophetic edge to the church's engagement on this issue. I do have to ask myself, when you look at the beginning of Exodus, book of Exodus 1, where Pharaoh has this policy of infanticide, so it's this state-sponsored, state-supported killing of all the male Hebrew babies. I do wonder what the considered position of the Church of England would have been to Pharaoh's command to all the people to kill the Hebrew baby boys. Certain people do dissent, Shiphrah and Puah, the midwives who we praise now, we hold them up as great examples. They were essentially doing what pro-life people are doing today, and what pro-life people are being vilified for today, and as we've seen, with little or no support from the established church. The Church of England, part of the deposit of faith, the main, thing they should be teaching is the Bible. And the Bible contains scriptures like Acts 5:29 that, when push comes to shove on these sorts of critical issues, Peter and the apostles say that we must obey God rather than human authority. I just don't see very much of that in this issue. And I think, you're bringing up of the situation in Nazi Germany is a good example where, that was a chance for the church to speak out prophetically, and by and large, the established church, the German National Church, didn't. And it was left to a few courageous, faithful souls within the confessing church, Bonhoeffer and others, who spoke out against that evil and paid often the ultimate sacrifice for that. But where is the prophetic voice from the church? Certainly, where is the episcopal leading on this, and where is this resolute campaigning and resolute opposition that they speak of? It's non-existent, frankly. And I think you gauge that by, as you say, the conversations with not just people in the street, but members of the Church of England themselves, who have no real idea where they stand on it, or where the Archbishop himself stands on this. It's very worrying.
I think what grieves me most about these responses, probably two things. So one is, and I said it in my correspondence, and I absolutely mean it. And if anyone thinks this is sort of, exaggeration or hyperbole, it really isn't. That there are specific babies alive today precisely because they got what they needed outside those clinics. I'll play another example later on. That's why the baby is alive. And if the Archbishop had his way earlier, if he had managed to ban this kind of activity earlier, those babies would have been killed. This is So this is more than just apathy. And, you know, we think of the parable of the Good Samaritan, and the priest and the Levite pass by on the other side. And, you know, it would be grievous enough if that's what we were doing, just passing by on the other side, you know, not helping. Of course, Jesus doesn't commend the priest or the Levite for, you know, for not having robbed someone themselves. You know, it's not like, okay, well done, you haven't had an abortion, well done, good and faithful servant. The point is not just to abstain from acts of violence. That the commendation for the Good Samaritan, he proactively did something that was needed. He brought that help that was needed. You know, the positive command to be a neighbor. So the priest and Levite are not the heroes of the story. Why? Because they passed by on the other side. But what we're seeing here goes a step much further, which is to say, this priest, you know, styles himself a priest. You know, that's the sort of lingo, isn't it? Not only passes by the other side, but actually wants there to be a 150-mile radius against the man who fell into the hands of robbers, to make sure that no one else can help him either. You know, it's one thing to say I'm not going to help, but it's quite another to say, and I'm going to make sure no one helps this guy. And if they do, they'll be slapped with a limitless fine or imprisonment. You know, this is so. Not only is this costing lives, and stopping help getting to people, it's actually sort of advancing that agenda beyond the law of the land. It's agitating for legislative change in the direction of more babies being killed, and it being illegal for people even to offer that help, which proves, and this is shocking, but what it proves is that the Archbishop is not even pro-choice as opposed to pro-life, which would be bad enough. He's not pro-choice, he's pro-abortion, because he's trying to take away that choice. He's trying to remove the options of support and life and alternatives where the women need it the most. He's trying to remove that choice. That's the thing that really shocks me, is it's not even just like hands off, let the babies die. It's like, and I'm going to stop other people intervening and at least giving the chance of life. And that's pretty serious to come from the leader of the established church.
It reminds me of that scripture at the end of Romans 1, you know, though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. And that is what this is doing, isn't it? It is giving approval to abortion, is giving approval to those who practice such things, which let's be clear, is the killing of children. And I just very quickly, Dave, want to say something on the spiritual gravity of the situation, because that also seems a little bit lost in the various, you know, the responses that you had from the Archbishop's office. That the, you know, abortion is a matter of, clearly it's a matter of life and death, but this is a matter of good versus evil, I would say. And the sacrifice of children is routinely condemned in Scripture, and it's spoken of in the language of abomination. You know, read Leviticus 18 or Deuteronomy 18. You know, sacrificing your own children is an abomination in God's eyes. Whatever euphemism we want to slap on it today, you know, Ezekiel 20 verse 31 talks about, you know, one's relationship, one's prayer life with God being impeded by abortion, by child sacrifice. So, you know, the prophet says, God says, shall I be inquired of you, O house of Israel, when you're doing these things, offering up your children in the fire? No, absolutely not. So it ruptures a relationship with God. It's spoken of in terms of innocent blood being poured out. Psalm 106 verse 38. The land is polluted with blood. Now, you know, we don't know how many children the Israelites killed, how many babies they killed, but I'm not sure it's 10 million. You know, if we've killed 10 million in this country, then to what extent is our land polluted with blood? And then just finally, one final scripture, Jeremiah 7:31, where you know, God says to do these things, to sacrifice your children, I did not command, nor did it come into my mind. Now, the Hebrew word there is literally heart. So child sacrifice, abortion is actually the polar opposite of God's heart for children, which is love, which is life, which is compassion. So it seems, and again, if this seems like, we're saying some pretty weighty things, it's because I think this is a weighty matter. It's almost like in the language of Isaiah, Isaiah 5:20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. I think we have to recognize the spiritual gravity of the situation. Not to do so is actually to do a disservice to the unborn children, and indeed the women and girls themselves who are caught up in this culture of death.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a saying often quoted. To do nothing, to be silent in the face of evil is itself evil. Not to speak is to speak. Attributed to Bonhoeffer. Silence in the face of evil is evil. Inaction in the face of evil is evil. And I'm reminded of another scripture, Jeremiah 23, verse 14. And among the prophets of Jerusalem, I have seen something horrible. They commit adultery and live a lie. They strengthen the hands of the evildoers, so that no one turns from his wickedness. And I think there is a strengthening of the hands of evildoers here by those who are meant to be the sort of, the light in the darkness, the salt of the earth. So even in subtle ways, when the Archbishop and others within the Church of England, and it's not just the Church of England, it was a problem we've seen all over the place, when they just reinforce the idea that abortion is healthcare. They reinforce this idea. The Archbishop even talked about, you can say the unborn has rights, i.e. the right to life. You can say that the woman has rights. What, right to an abortion? Is that what you're talking about? The right to kill a child? Is that a right now? Is that a human right? Are you falling into that kind of framing of this issue, that this is a right? Or in the correspondence I got, the right to access this, whatever healthcare you want to call it, without feeling intimidated or feeling harassed. Now, it's very important, just as an aside, to clarify, harassment and intimidation have been illegal for a very long time, and the abortion lobby wants to keep saying that this is about getting harassment and intimidation away from the clinics. There is no harassment or intimidation near the clinics. How can I tell you that? Because if there had been, we'd have been arrested. It's not like we're not being watched. It's not like there aren't, people out there who would get us arrested at the drop of the hat if we put a foot wrong. But no one ever has. There never has been any harassment or intimidation. It's just silent prayer, or praying out loud, or offering information or education, whatever. There's no harassment, no intimidation. Okay. Now, to say that they have a right not to feel intimidated. Well, hang on. Okay. Now we're moving into a whole different realm. People can feel whatever they want to feel. And it's been clarified at a European level that there is no right not to feel offended, because that's a subjective response. There is a right not to be physically harassed, etc., etc. And that's already been the case in the UK for a long time. But anyway, that's just an aside. The fact that framing of what this so-called abortion actually is being reinforced, that in itself is enough in terms of strengthening the hands of evildoers, calling this healthcare, access without being harassed, all that kind of, and not to mention the sort of, whilst you're strengthening the hands of evildoers, because they love that. The abortion industry love it if you join them in calling what they're doing healthcare, when what they're actually doing is killing. And they also love it if you join in with them demonizing those who are offering ways out and alternatives to this killing. So that in itself is strengthening the hands of evildoers. But to literally back legislative change to keep that help away, that's strengthening the hands of evildoers in sort of really, really concrete terms. I think if we were to think back to, the ancient Near East, and, the child sacrifice was going on, people offering their children to Molech, passing their children through the fire to this hideous idol, Molech. It's unimaginable that, the high priest of the time, or one of the priests, would not only turn a blind eye, but actually prevent people being near that scene so as to try and dissuade and save those children, or even just to pray against what's going on. The priest would actually keep them away. But that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing, so protective is the Archbishop of child sacrifice that he he doesn't want any hindrance to be there when it happens. Now, he would no doubt reject what I've just said there. He would say, no, it's a tragedy. No, I value every life. Well, it's our actions that speak loudest. And if he's backing buffer zones, that shows what's actually going on here. He is preferring unhindered child sacrifice over even just the option of a way out, which, as I say, many mothers and fathers have availed themselves of, and babies are alive today because of it.
Yeah, well, absolutely, Dave. And I think, let's be clear, when the pro-abortion side styles itself, the pro-choice, they're not really pro-choice, because they don't want these kind of informed choices being made. They don't want any, shred of doubt creeping into the mother's mind. They don't want, at the last minute of the abortion, not to go ahead. So pro-choice itself is a complete misnomer, because they want the outcome where the maximum possible number of abortions happens. This is an industry. Let's be very clear about that. So yeah, by siding with the abortion industry, of course you continue that narrative. And it was very unfortunate that in the House of Lords debate that the Bishop of Manchester used, very deliberately, I assume, the language of healthcare to talk about abortion. He sort of said this isn't about the morality of abortion, but then uses the term, a euphemistic term like healthcare, which puts himself squarely within that narrative, within that pro-abortion narrative, that completely, undermines the church's stance. So, again, this isn't the resolute opposition that we've been promised. It's doing the abortion lobby's work for it, really. Yeah. And and as we've seen, Rachel Clark from BPAS tweeted afterwards thanking him for his clarity and support. So there's no doubt, there's no equivocation in their minds of what he was providing for them. Much as we saw in the 60s with the 65 report from the Church of England Board of Social Responsibility, paving the way, as it were, for David Steele's bill. This is the church, if you like, blessing, giving their imprimatur to this wretched piece of legislation, which is going to lead to more babies being killed, which is going to prevent the lives saved, which you've talked about, and this is somehow, well, we're pro healthcare. Yeah, I mean, you couldn't make it up, really.
Yeah, and if there's any doubt there in the minds of listeners as to, again, are we over egging this? Well, the abortion providers and the abortion lobby themselves don't seem to think so. Recently they commended, as you said, Tim, the Bishop of Manchester, and that's in the recent debate about nationalising these buffer zones. They thanked him publicly on Twitter. They clearly consider him as on board. He's an ally. He's an ally for getting life-saving help and information away from these clinics so as many babies can be killed as possible. That's the Bishop of Manchester. But also, it's something that Mary Stopes International said for a long time. So let me just read you. This is on Mary Stopes International's website. Okay, there's a tab called Why We Advocate for National Legislation on Abortion Clinic Buffer Zones. Okay, so this is a page that's been standing there for a while, but updated in, maybe it was only since April 2022, but at least it was edited then. So they've been campaigning for a long time, and it's easy enough to sort of be dismissive and think, oh, Archbishop, who cares what he thinks, who cares what the church thinks anymore. But actually this page on Mary Stopes International's website, so that's the main abortion provider, one of the main abortion providers worldwide, says this. That's why the Archbishop of Canterbury himself, Justin Welby, has backed local buffer zones around abortion clinics. People going to abortion clinics, he said in an interview with LBC Radio, that's one we just watched last year, whatever you think of abortion, are human beings. The Church of England has a very clear on abortion, but how do we love the people who are going there? Treat them as human beings and value and respect them. And then this is what Mary Stopes says. If the government won't listen to us on that point, perhaps they will listen to him. Okay, so that's an abortion provider acknowledging the Archbishop of Canterbury as a more avid supporter and ally than the government currently is. And they're hoping the government, in their eyes, is going to catch up with the Archbishop of Canterbury in getting everything away from those clinics so that they get a monopoly on these women and their babies. So this is the influence. This is the... And again, it's very much like 1965 take two, because in 1965, the Church of England went ahead of the government and really national opinion, you could say, and paved the way for the Abortion Act. And here we are again, before a lot of people even knew what a buffer zone was, the Archbishop was backing it. The abortion lobby recognised this, just like they did in the 60s. They really cashed in on that support, because it's a very strong argument. If the abortion lobby can say, look, even the Church of England agrees with us. Even the church thinks this is a good idea. So the message going out to Christians is, look, your leaders already confirmed this. You don't need to worry about this. Leave it with us. And then the rest of the nation says, okay, well, the church is catching up with the times. So we're all in agreement. This is the impact it has. And this is, again, strengthening the hands of evildoers. It's impactful. It makes a difference. Real lives are affected as a result.
Just one very quick caveat, or one very quick addition to that, Dave, is we're witnessing perhaps the Church of England, or the Anglican Communion at least, disintegrating over various issues at the moment with General Synod. But the Archbishop of Canterbury does not only have authority within England. In fact, arguably he has more authority in other parts of the world where the Anglican Church is much stronger, is a much more vibrant. I know that, don't get me wrong, there's many vibrant, faithful Anglican churches in the UK, but the bulk of Anglicans are living in Central Africa, West Africa, East Africa, and Mary Stopes International. The clue is in the name there. They're an international agency. They want to roll abortion out to Africa and all over. And so if they can get the Archbishop of Canterbury to endorse abortion in those areas where he still has some clout and authority, that is going to impact the Anglican teaching in these other parts of the world. So it's incredibly detrimental from that regard. But I think, they know what they're doing, Mary Stopes, for sure.
Yeah. And we've got to pay attention to what the other side is saying. And, often I think we where we're sleepy, the abortion lobby is wide awake. And where we're complacent, they're very intentional. And whereas we might sort of let these things wash over us like water off a duck's back, it's interesting they've clocked that, and they've got that on their website, and they've got it there to stay.
Absolutely.
Because they consider that to be helpful. Well, I just want to turn our attention slightly as we sort of draw towards an end soon. We focused a lot, and I think rightly, on the impact this has on the babies and their mothers, and that's absolutely critical. But there's another element here to the buffer zones, which is perhaps more to do with freedom of speech and even freedom of religion. And these are also important things for us to be talking about, and again for the church to be backing. I mean, for very obvious reasons. I mean, the idea that one has to try and persuade any church leader that freedom of speech and freedom of religion might be a good thing to keep hold of. I mean, it's kind of it's in the job title, isn't it? I mean, if you're it's how long is it till they come for you if they're cracking down on freedom of religion and freedom of speech? But what's happened, quite interestingly, in the case of Isabel, we mentioned this. Let's just go over this for those who aren't aware. So Isabel, she's a friend of ours. She's one of the leaders of March for Life. We work together on a few things. She's based near Birmingham, and again, this is before the national stuff's actually been rolled out. So this is one of the localized kind of buffer zones. And she prayed silently on her own within the zone, actually after hours. So the clinic wasn't even open at the time. This is sort of 5:30 p.m. or something. And she's praying silently in her head on her own, and she's arrested. And she confesses, yep, I was praying silently in my head. She describes her thoughts at that time, and she's essentially charged with thought crime. And that's what these buffer zones provide for. Now, interestingly, as in the case of Christian hacking, more recently, the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, they want to try and drop this. They don't want to go there anymore because, again, you don't want to be making international news hauled up at the highest appeal courts because you're trying to arrest someone, a woman, for praying on her own, for a thought crime. It doesn't look good. So they're trying to drop it. I understand that once these proceedings have commenced, it is your legal right to insist that they are followed through to the end. You can insist, no, I do want to go to court. Let's see this through. And I believe that is their intention. And rightly so, because we've got to test these things. You can't just have that hanging over you.
Sure.
And whoever else is going to maybe one day pray, and will they get arrested or not? We need to clarify
It would be good to know as well whether you can go to prison and pay the fine in your head. Is that sufficient? It's not to punish me. Can I just do it in my head?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm thinking myself there.
Yeah. I identify as having paid the fine. Or
absolutely.
But this is the thing. It's and interestingly, we talked with a lawyer while all this was brewing, and so freedom of thought is one of those absolute rights, and so all credit to Isabel and her team for carefully planning this to have all the facts lined up, and they got a really strong case. But the thing that just interests me on this point is in backing buffer zones, the Archbishop is not only keeping life-saving help away from these babies, these precious bearers of God's image, he's also supporting religious persecution, which is quite interesting. Because on the one hand, I don't know if you've seen this, Tim, but of course he's wanting to kind of foster, at least on the appearance of things, foster this really close relationship with the Roman Catholic Church. But when a Roman Catholic gets arrested for praying in his own country, he's nowhere to be found. In fact, he backed that law. Yes. I mean, that's quite interesting in terms of my historical.
You're on your own now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that's ever. I mean, obviously during the Reformation there was a lot of stuff going on, but I don't think it's ever been illegal to pray silently. I don't think anyone's ever been arrested in this country for silent prayer before.
No, it's desperate, and I think, as we should also say, as the very valid point, very astute point that Christian Hacking made. Where is it in our country that prayer is first banned? Well, it's in the places where children are being killed, children are being sacrificed. I mean, that is exactly right, and that's a key spiritual insight that plays into all of this. And I think we just have to keep bearing all these things in mind. But yeah, it is extra. We are living in extraordinary times, and you kind of think, oh no, it's not going to go that far, and then in a few weeks' time, it's gone even further.
Well, I mean, if you can get arrested for your silent thoughts, then I mean, there's not much left. I mean, okay, it's localized, but how long before those, how long before those zones just get expanded until you're only allowed to think what you want to think in the privacy of your own room, and then what? Interesting breaking news just today is another chap, a Catholic priest. Who goes by the name Father Sean. In fact, he was at this event as well on Saturday in the Midlands. He also is facing court for praying, and as I mentioned, for having a bumper sticker saying "Unborn Lives Matter" on the back of his car, which he had before the PSBO was passed. He's facing criminal charges for a bumper sticker saying "Unborn Lives Matter," and again. Sorry to bang on about it, but that's what the Archbishop of Canterbury supports, that a Catholic priest has been arrested for having a bumper sticker saying "Unborn Lives Matter," which is apparently what the Church of England thinks as well. But they also want that to be a criminal offence. I mean, this is crazy, but this is what's happening.
Retroactive prosecution. But also, what does it? One thinks a little bit of this is what we fought 2 world wars for. Aren't you delighted to live in such a free and glorious country? But also when we talk about exporting democracy to the world, the invasion of Iraq and things like this, and you think, well, what is exactly this democracy that we're wanting to export? It's not, at times it's not worth the, I think we just have to keep calling this stuff out, Dave. Keep challenging it. Keep pushing it through. And sadly, I think it is going to require legal action at times. But almost reducing it to absurdity, helping people see what is it that they are buying into. What is it that we are allowing folks to do, really, or allowing our government and House of Lords to do, really.
And that's very much the intent of this. Not only this episode, but this whole podcast. I think I want people to understand that we're doing all we can to approach this in the sense of, we were praying just before this podcast. Look, there, but the grace of God go I. Anything we can see, any goodness in us is just by the grace of God. We're not. The purpose of this episode and these podcasts is not to try and point the finger or whatever. We're trying to expose what's costing lives. We're trying to expose what is actually chipping away at the essential freedoms of our nation. And we actually want to call out to Justin Welby and to others in these influential positions. Please see what's really going on here. Please see the gravity of this issue. Please see the impact of the positions that you're taking, and there is no neutral ground when it comes to this. When it comes to the killing of babies, when it comes to the chipping away of, for example, freedom of speech, these are devastatingly important things. And I mean, simply standing to one side is enough to let them accelerate, but to actually put your hand to those seeking to accelerate them deliberately, I mean, of course, that does even more.
And I just say as well, Dave, you mentioned about the freedom of thought being a kind of absolute, right, an inviolable kind of right. I would say, the right to life, you can't get much more essential than that, because if you're not alive, none of these, rights, freedoms matter at all, do they? And so that is why I guess we are so exercised about this particular issue, because, if someone isn't allowed to live, then all these wonderful freedoms mean nothing to them, really. And so I think we have to bear that in mind as well.
Absolutely. Just as we close, I want to turn our attention back to that. What this is really about, the most important thing that's going on here. We are talking about the lives of innocent children, the bearers of God's image. I just want to play this short video that I was quite touched by. This is okay. So this is from March for Life, and this is a testimony from one of these many mothers, fathers, who are giving thanks for the help they've been given outside these clinics. Okay, so I'm just going to play this short clip to remind us, and if people still aren't getting this, why are we banging on about this? Okay, this is why. Watch this. Listen to this. This is why this is a big deal.
We heard that they want to put buffer zones outside of these abortion centres to stop people praying. I don't necessarily agree with this. I don't see any problem with peaceful prayer. It wasn't intimidating to us at all. In fact, quite the opposite. It was comforting. Had Danny not had that one person there that one day, I don't think he would have had the strength to have texted me and told me to come out, that we can do this. And we did do it. I did come out, and we had all of the help we needed, with no intimidation or pressure or anything. There is absolutely no need for buffer zones, and in fact I think it's more a comfort for somebody who is even there by themselves. If they came out and there's nobody there, they're going to go back in, whereas they could come out and somebody could be there and offer them all of the support that they need.
And that's what it's about. And that story is repeated 100-fold, maybe 1,000-fold. There are hundreds at least who have been saved just like that precious family, from this route. And that's what we're talking about here. And if this message can get to Justin Welby, which is appealing to you, can you look at that child, look at that baby boy, and reconsider, is this really your position, that you want to say, look, that baby's life, I'd rather the help wasn't there?
It's about choosing life, isn't it? It's right there in the book of Deuteronomy, choosing life. This is what it's about. This is why these people go there. This is why the pro-life movement, exists, that many, and by God's grace all, would actually choose not to kill their child or children, but to choose life. And this is what is being taken away.
And we think of, Proverbs 24, those famous verses, rescue those being led away to death, staggering towards the slaughter. What could be a more immediate and literal kind of application or sort of scenario in which those words ring true than that little family there staggering towards the slaughter, and thank God there was someone there to give them a way out. So this is why it matters. And I just want to urge people listening to this, if you haven't talked to your church leadership about where they stand on buffer zones, let alone abortion, we need to talk about buffer zones, because this is where the rubber's hitting the road for so many. This is where the lives are. But I want to finish with, as well as church leaders, please write to your your MPs. A lot of MPs are being taken in by this rhetoric of it's access to healthcare, it's about stopping intimidation, so on. But I just want to finish, as I often do when it comes to buffer zones, with a challenge that still right now the greatest threat to life-saving activity, such as this outside clinic stuff, the greatest threat still, and even if the law goes through and changes, the greatest problem still will be the buffer zones in our hearts. It's still it's still all the stuff we are able to do legally. And this is what Isabel said on the weekend, actually. Someone asked, should we go and break the law? She said, you know what? There's a whole load of places in the UK you can still pray and help people and advocate for life totally legally. And we're not doing it. It's like there are so many clinics right now that have no one outside them, even though it's still allowed legally. So let's as much as we need to stand up and campaign against this legislative change, we also need to acknowledge the sort of those barriers, those fear barriers in our own hearts, and that so often what's stopping us getting help to those women is actually not a problem out there; it's a problem in here.
Amen.
Well, let's leave it there. Thank you so much, Tim, for joining us today, and thank you everyone for listening. And if you've found this helpful, if you think these messages are important, can you help us get the message out there? Can you apparently liking the videos really helps just to boost their kind of searchability online, so more people will hear about this. If you just, it takes half a second, just like this video. If you can comment, if you can share it with people, send it to friends, family, whatever. And of course, do subscribe. We're really grateful for your support. Do tune in next week as we continue to speak about abortion. Thank you so much.